Yo, welcome back to Photoshop. My name is Josh. So today we are talking about 5 things every beginner should know in Photoshop. So we are going to start with part one, part two, and part three. So if you're a beginner, you're getting started in Photoshop, what are the necessary things you need to get familiar with? The little things and the most important things you need to get familiar with. My name is Josh and welcome back to the channel. If you find this video interesting, don't forget to give us a like, thumbs up, share, subscribe, and tell your friends about my channel. So let's fire up Photoshop and let's start something. All right, Photoshop is open, and I'm using Adobe Photoshop 2022. So your user interface might be quite different from mine if you're using maybe an older version or a more recent version of Photoshop. So, but any which way, they all work the same way. So to get started, I'm going to click on this Photoshop icon that looks like this PS. I'm going to click on it, click on Photoshop icon, and it's going to bring me up to my user interface in Photoshop. Now, let's talk about the 5 things beginner needs to know in Photoshop. Number one, beginner needs to know that Photoshop is not just for retouching pictures. Photoshop has lots of features in it. So the first thing we always want to ensure we do is to get the workspace that has to do with photography. So to do that, you have to ensure that the workspace you're using is for photography. So you come over to Windows and then you come over to workspace and make sure your workspace, make sure photography is selected. The reason why it's very important is because so that the tools you're going to be using, they will not be looking different. For example, if I click on photography, to my left hand side, you can see how the tools are over here. Now, if I come over to Windows and come to workspace and I choose motion, you will notice some of those tools are going to change and the interface. So you can see this timeline showing and all of that. So if I come over to Windows and I still go to workspace, I choose painting, it's still going to change some of the tools and the user interface. So always ensure you're on your workspace and you're on photography. That is option number one. That is the number one thing you should know. Now let's move on to number two. Number two is you should know how to import a picture into Photoshop. There are several ways you can import a picture into Photoshop. So I'm going to show you 2 ways. Number one is just by double tapping or double click on the on the screen here. When you double tap, Photoshop is going to open up your computer and ask you, oh, the picture you want to bring into Photoshop, where is it located? So I can tell Photoshop, oh, the picture is located on my desktop, and I have a picture on my desktop. I will just click on the picture, then I click on open. So Photoshop is going to help me bring in the picture into my interface so that I can work on the picture. Also, if I don't want to use this method, I can decide to go to File and I go to Open, and Photoshop is going to check my computer and tell me, oh, where do you want to import? Then I can click on the picture and also click on Open. So that is it. So those are the 2 ways you can import picture. There's also another one which is faster. Okay, let me show you guys. So let me cancel this and come over here. I can minimize Photoshop. Just go on my desktop or go to wherever my picture is. Just drag and bring it closer to where Photoshop is. Photoshop will automatically open. And I can drop it somewhere here. Then automatically brings it in. So those are the 3 ways you can import a picture into Photoshop. Now let's move on to number 3. Whenever you bring in a picture into Photoshop, for whatever reasons, you might want to crop the picture. So now to my left hand side, I have the Photoshop tools. This is the Photoshop tools here. If you can't find your tools here, just come over to Windows and come and select tools on your Windows here. If you find your tools and maybe for one or two reasons you want to hide your tools, if you're a pro, you don't need to see the tools. You can also come back to Windows and and check it. But for now, I always like my tools. So these tools here, there's a little block here. You can also use that to move the tools around. If you don't like it to your left hand side, you can place it to your right hand side, depending on where you want it. If you want to collapse it to make it look small, there is a little sign that looks like less than over here. You can click on it. It's going to make it look very small. So the number three thing beginners want to know in Photoshop, or beginners should know in Photoshop, is how to crop a picture. And how to crop a picture is very easy. All you have to do is come over to this search menu and type crop. If you type on crop tool, you can click on it. You notice that the crop tool has appeared on the picture. So there are several things you can do depending on the aspect ratio you want the picture to be. So if you're going to be posting this on Instagram size is 4:5 over here. So you can select 4:5. If you're going to be posting this picture as your thumbnail on YouTube, it has to be 16:9. Then you can drag it around to fit in the crop, So depending on what you're using it for, but a large number of the pictures I edit are usually meant for Instagram. So I'm going to leave it in 4:5 aspect ratio. Then I'm going to drag this down a little bit. I think that's all. Then I'll click on enter. So I just crop this picture to a 4:5 picture. So moving on, number 4 thing beginners should know in Photoshop is the adjustment panel. Adjustment panel is used to make slight or major changes to a picture. So how do you find the adjustment panel? You come over to your Windows, then you come to adjustment here. Now, once you do that, to my right hand side, you see the adjustment panels over here. And on the adjustment panel, there are about 15 adjustments you can do. The first one is brightness, levels, curves, exposures, vibrance, hue and saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup, invert, posterize, threshold, selective color, and gradient map. So depending on what you want to achieve, it can determine the kind of adjustment you're going to be doing. But I'm just going to walk you through them very briefly. Then in another video, I'm going to ensure I make a much more detailed video on how to go about using the adjustments. So let's start from the brightness. So one thing I love this adjustment is it creates a new layer on the layer panel here, so that any adjustment you make on the picture is not permanently on the picture. It's just the layer, and then should you decide to delete it, you can always delete it. So I have my brightness and contrast layer here. I can just click on it, click on my brightness and contrast layer, then I can decide on what I want to do with it. So I can decide to increase the brightness a little, and I can decide to play with the contrast a little depending on how much I want it. But I think like this, I think I like it like this. So there's a little eye icon here, like I used to check my before and after, before and after, before and after. So that is the first adjustment I just did. Now moving on to the next adjustment, which is levels. I can decide to change the blacks, brighten them up a little bit, or the bright part I can decide to darken them up a little bit, depending on what I want to achieve. So all of these are the adjustment, and this is number 4. And this is the 4th thing every beginner needs to know in Photoshop. Always ensure you use the adjustment panel here to make minor and major changes to your picture. And lastly, number 5 thing every beginner should know in Photoshop is how to export the picture when you're done, how to save the picture to your computer, to your phone when you're done in Photoshop. So to do that, make sure you are on the background layer, which is the main picture. If you like shortcut, you can use Option Command S if you are on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, you use Control Alt S if you're on a Windows. But if you don't like shortcut, you can actually come over to File, and then you come to Export. This is Export here. File, Export, then you can come to Export As. So depends on what you want to export it as. You can decide to export it as a JPEG picture if you're sharing it instantly, and you can decide to export it as a PNG if you're still going to be using it for some artwork and all of that. But I'm going to be exporting this as a JPEG picture. Then I'm going to be exporting it to, let me see, my desktop. This one is very okay too, but if you don't want to export it this way too, there are other ways you can export it. So for example, I can come over to my file here and I can come to export, or I can come to save instead. I can come to save and I can save it on my computer. Then it's going to ask me the name I want to use to save it. Let me just save it to tutorials. Then it's going to ask me where I want to save it. Desktop format, I can decide to leave it in Photoshop format, large document format, Photoshop PDF, depending on what exactly I want. But I'm going to leave this in, I don't want to leave it in Photoshop. So let me cancel this. Let me save a copy. Let me see if I can save it in JPEG. All right. So what I just did was I went to file and I went to save a copy, and then I can save on my computer JPEG. I can save the name to as tutorial, and then I can save it on my desktop and click on save. So it's going to show me this JPEG option. I want the file size to be large. If you want the file size to be small, you can drop down the slider, but I want it to be large. So it's going to show me the MB, the size. This is 8.3 MB, then I can click on OK. So when I go back to my desktop now, I'm going to see the picture, and that is how to export a picture in Photoshop. So I hope you guys have learned something. This is 5 things every beginner needs to know in Photoshop. This is part 1. In my next video, I'm going to be doing part 2, and in subsequent video, I will do part 3 and part 4, so that if you're new to Photoshop, you can get very familiar with how to do all of these things, and enjoying a very seamless operation and work in Photoshop. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, don't forget to tell your friends about my channel. And thank you for stopping by. If you would love me to continue with the series, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you very much. My name is Josh, and I will see you guys in the next one. Stay safe.